Welcome to another edition of Illinois Lawmakers in partnership with Capital News Illinois. I'm Jack Titchener along with Amanda Vinicky, the host of Chicago Tonight's Week in Review. New title for you.
New title, thank you.
Excellent. Well, let's set the stage for this program, Amanda. We're talking on Thursday morning, the day before the scheduled adjournment of the spring session. So clearly a lot of things will still be taking place in the next day or so, especially with the budget.
Yes, things are still evolving, they're fluid, and that's typical for this time of year. This is not surprising, no need to freak out. This is not hearkening back to, for example, the Bruce Rauner administration when you had a budget stalemate and there was reason to be on pins and needles as to whether a budget was going to pass on time. This will it pass by the scheduled adjournment, sort of this early deadline that the legislature set for themselves to go home and enjoy summer / start campaigning early? Maybe not, but they're going to get there.
And it is nothing like the weirdness when Blagojevich would call them in every day for weeks on end and nothing happened.
Including weekends. I spent a birthday once, a very unfun birthday in the driveway of the governor's mansion.
Well, a lot of this comes down to the fact there's really not a lot of mystery in where we stand with regards to revenues. We know that there's not going to be there wasn't an April surprise, a big windfall of money. But by the same token, there still will be some surpluses. So it's not exactly like there's a crisis. People are more or less working around the margins of this budget.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it, Jack. There is some consternation about some of the packages that the governor has put forward. And I think that right now you've got some different options in the mix because it's, if we're not going to get this, what then? So for example, when you look at a gaming tax, I'm hearing that there are some other options that are being thrown out in terms of, okay, if we're not going to bring it up to the 35% that the governor had suggested for sports wagering, maybe we can do something else. So, but it's generally going to be along the same lines, especially for folks that are just, average residents. You're not looking at, for example, an income tax increase, but also part of that there is something with the deduction. We don't need to get into that now, but as you noted, I think generally you have a governor who has crafted a budget that is balanced because he says that that's what has to happen, but it's also not doing anything that is going to really hit people hard in their wallets and make them take notice. You look at something like the grocery tax, that's going to, in fact, hit more on localities. And he certainly, I think, it's a budget that is geared toward running for something in the future. It's a budget that allows him to make investments, to not make cuts, but say that he didn't have any sort of big tax increases. And so what I'm hearing is he's really gunning for it, and in these talks with the legislators, wanting something that looks like this to pass, and presumably it's for those very reasons.
So it pretty much comes down to being very close to what he introduced back in February with the budget address. One of the things that there has been some controversy on in the last few weeks has been a bill that the Democrats ran and the governor signed almost immediately, having to do with how people are slated for after primaries. It's complicated. And
if nobody runs in the primary,
right,
a party can choose somebody to run in the general election. They can slate them.
And a local judge this week has put a temporary injunction hold on that.
Yes, he's put a hold on that, and so presumably that means that anybody who wanted to try to be slated still has that opportunity to do so, but it's a temporary hold, so I think still a lot of questions. I'm no lawyer, but we do need to point out, I think, that this is one bill that the Democrats hurried to pass ahead of time, the governor signed. It certainly is atypical, and I think that's something that the judge is focusing in on. It seems as if it was intended to become law mid-election, and so that is the very reason that it is therefore being held up in court.
Got about 30 seconds left. Any other big issues that you expect to be decided in the next couple of days? If it doesn't get done now, it probably won't happen to veto session.
Exactly. I'm not sure what will actually make its way to the governor's desk, but I'm hearing that there are deals on carbon sequestration. There are attempts to try and resolve ongoing issues related to cannabis and to the hemp industry. So those are just a couple of the big ticket items that there's going to be a last minute effort to get through.
Amanda Vinicky, thanks so much for your time and your expertise here on Illinois Lawmakers. Always great to have you on the program.
It's always good to be on, Jack. Thank you, and happy end of session.
K through 12 education is the focus as we welcome Democratic Senate Majority Leader Kimberly Lightford of Maywood back to Illinois Lawmakers. It's good to have you back, Leader.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to join you.
Senator Lightford, you've served in the Senate since 1998, and you've been a longtime leader on education issues. You currently serve as Vice Chair of the Senate Education and Appropriations Education Committees. Let's take a look at what Governor Pritzker originally outlined for spending for K through 12 for fiscal year 2025. I believe he was asking for another $450 million increase for K through 12. How's it all lining up now as the budget comes together?
Well, I appreciate the governor's efforts in ensuring that each year we continue to appropriate additional fundings in the evidence-based funding model. From the establishment of that model, we have been putting $350 million in. So the governor has kept pace with the additional $350 million in EBF, but he also put money in spaces around literacy, which is fantastic, around career technical programs. We know our young people need more skill sets, and we need to have more vocational programs in our high schools. And then he's also left resources for a program to make sure we continue to attain and recruit new teachers. So there's revenues there to make sure that the education system overall continue to grow. But then there's also some other programs that I care about, after-school programs, programs for teacher professional development, which is critical. And programs that make sure that at the ground level, school district level, kids are being more supportive around mental health challenges or dealing with trauma or just items of resiliency. So just want to make sure that those efforts are there.
Going back for a moment to the evidence-based funding model for K through 12 schools, as you indicated, we've been allocating another $350 million per year ever since that program started. There was some hope that by education advocacy groups that maybe it could be increased a bit earlier to meet that target of 2027.
I would have loved that. When we first did this bill, sir, our goal was if we put $500 million in a year, then we would get to that adequacy target in a 10-year period. If we do anything less, it's going to just take us longer to get to adequacy. So I would love for us to get to that $500 million desired number that we originally put in statute as our suggested number, but we've only been able to put in $350 million from year one and each year thereafter. So I'm not disappointed that it didn't happen. I'm hoping that we can generate enough revenues that we can add that additional $150 million to $350 and get to that $500 million number.
This budget will also make big investments as well in early childhood education. There's more money in the budget for that. What are the programs you're most interested in that regard?
Oh, I'm so super excited about the Early Childhood Development Agency because there was so much inequities in child care, in preschool for all, in programs that we know help children learn and have them prepared for kindergarten. And so it's really important that we take those programs that are under the Department of Human Services. There's programs under the Department of Children and Family Services. There's programs under the State Board of Education. There's federal programs. There's state programs. So streamlining that whole entire process would allow us to help educate more 3- and 4-year-olds and begin to take a look from birth to 3. We know that even when a child is in the womb, that reading to a child is important and things of that nature. So we want to have an overall concept to get kids from birth until first grade with that department. So I'm super excited.
We've got about 30 seconds left. Any other major initiatives come to mind as far as your priorities for K through 12 this session?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we put those social workers back in school and we have those school counselors, and that's why REACH program is very important and other programs to help give kids those supplemental services that they need.
Senate Majority Leader Kimberly Lightford of Maywood, thank you for joining us on Illinois Lawmakers. It's good to have you back.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed myself.
Higher education is our next topic on Illinois Lawmakers, and our guest is Republican State Senator Chapin Rose of Mahomet, whom we often call on for his expertise in the higher education field. Good to have you on the program.
Thanks for having me, Jack. Appreciate it.
The governor's budget proposal called for higher ed to receive something like $2.5 billion in fiscal year 2025, an increase of around $24 million for universities and another $6 million more for community colleges. Is that pretty much in line with what we're hearing now?
So let's correct a couple of things. The governor's increase on paper for the just operational expenses is about a 2% increase, except for the University of Illinois, which is about 1.8. The problem is he cut another several other line items elsewhere, like for example, mental health treatment. Universities and community colleges are receiving mental health reimbursements for the cost of mental health treatment of their students. When you factor those cuts into the overall pie, many universities end up actually getting cut. So for example, Eastern in my district was receiving less than, got about a 4.6, 4.7% cut. U of I got cut, et cetera. When you look at the entire package, not just the GRF increases for base operations.
So there's been some trade-offs made.
Yeah, I mean, basically what they did is they cut things like mental health treatment to show an increase to the base operations. That's not exactly an actual increase to higher education as a whole.
What about the monetary award program? That was
Slated
for increases.
Yeah, that was increased, absolutely.
One of the things that, of course, we've been talking about for years around here is, how the House and Senate came together back in 2017 to reform the way that we fund K through 12 schools in the state of Illinois. We're now looking at that at the state university level. Could you give us some insights into that and how that goes?
So if you go back in time, myself and Danny Brady, Representative Brady, represent ISU, we were the initial filed a bill years ago to come up with a formula for higher education. And really, we need a formula for higher education. That goal remains. There was a lot of good work done by commission over the summer to give us some suggestions, but there's also some very problematic things in that. If depending on what university you're at, for example, Urbana would potentially have its foundation counted against it. On one part of that proposal, they could lose about $80 million off the top simply because they have a foundation. Well, Jack, you and I both know that foundations are great to have, but they're usually restricted dollars. In other words, someone's giving a gift, in the name of their mother for an English scholarship. She's not giving it as a gift to underwrite a medical school at the University of Illinois Chicago, right? So just because you have a foundation doesn't mean you can just go do whatever you want with it. The president of SIU system raised this as a real concern. There's other concerns, frankly, of a constitutional nature. They have a piece in there where the recruitment of an African American student, for example, they'd get a $500 bonus, but the recruitment of a Latino student would get a $1,000 bonus. Well, what century is this exactly, right? So, talk about equal protection under the Constitution. There's some serious concerns with how that lays out. Now, again, let's restate. Higher education needs a funding formula. We need to do, as you noted, the same thing we've done for K-12, but it's not ready to go yet. And this commission has met. It's given us some really good suggestions. It's some things that need to be looked at and fine-tuned. We just discussed a couple of them. Here's another one. For the research ones, there's really no accounting for Research 1 status in the formula that commission proposed. So, for example, SIU gets penalized for having a dental school. The University of Illinois gets penalized for having a dental and medical school, those types of things. So, those programs are very costly to put on, and there's really no accounting for that in their plan.
One other thing that I want to get to, we've got about a minute left, and that is universities are expecting to see a big fall off in enrollment, as much as 15% over the next 4 years starting next year. How are Illinois schools lined up to deal with that?
Yeah, well, look, that's the enrollment cliff, and that's why things like Aim High scholarship program that I authored, was my idea, and then the higher education work group came forward and helped support getting that across the finish line. That helps us attract and keep and retain the best and the brightest in our state. But I'm telling you right now, this is a huge problem. It's not just Illinois, it's the whole country. I mean, that 15% enrollment cliff is going to hit. It's going to hit the whole country, and I don't think higher education as a whole anywhere is positioned for it. I think everyone's staring at a problem coming at them, and they're all hoping it goes away, and it's not going to go away.
And so like something like 875,000 students nationwide. Senator Rose, thanks so much for your time and expertise.
Thanks for having us, Jack.
Up next on Illinois Lawmakers, our guest is Democratic State Representative Anna Moeller of Elgin, a veteran of the Illinois House since 2014 and Vice Chair of the Health and Human Services Appropriations Committee.
Yes.
Good to have you on the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Wonderful being here with you. You were successful in winning House passage of one of Governor Pritzker's signature legislative goals on insurance reform.
Yes.
The Health Care Protection Act passed the House on a healthy bipartisan margin.
Yes.
Tell us about the act.
So this is a comprehensive set of policies that are meant to reform the insurance industry here in Illinois to make sure that consumers have access to high quality health care and that insurance companies are reformed to make sure that they're not putting profits over patient care. There are several elements included in the legislation. The first is to ban prior authorization for people who are experiencing critical mental health crises so that they can get the inpatient hospital care that they need without having to get prior approval from a health insurance company and deal with the bureaucracy of that during a time when they're facing a crisis in their life. The second aspect to this legislation is banning a procedure called step therapy. This is a policy that insurance companies use that require patients to fail first on a medication or procedure before they're allowed to access a medication or procedure that is prescribed by their doctor.
I'm familiar with that to a certain degree because I know of a situation where a person was really not needing a hip transplant yet, but they wanted her to go through a certain kind of
Yes.
physical therapy, which didn't work, and you ended up with.
Exactly. And when we've been talking to doctors and patients and advocates around the state, this particular practice comes up a lot. So many people have to go through this process before being able to access the care that they actually need. And so this is an important provision that would ban insurance companies from requiring patients to go through that.
And you're talking also about ensuring that they go by what are known as generally accepted standards of care. Could
Yes.
you elaborate a bit?
Yes, again, this is requiring insurance companies when they're determining what types of procedures are going to be covered, that they use generally accepted standards of care that are developed by experts in the field of the clinical expertise or area that governs that procedure, so that they're not arbitrarily denying access to therapies, procedures, medications based on cost. Again, too often we hear about insurance companies being the barrier to access to care because of a desire to protect profits. And we're ending that practice in Illinois, making sure that people get the care that they need.
There's another provision in here about banning insurance companies from requiring prior authorization to covering the cost of inpatient psychiatric services.
Yes. Yeah, during testimony in the Human Services Committee where this bill came through and the committee that I chair, we heard heartbreaking stories from doctors. Knowing that a patient needed the inpatient care to deal with a mental health crisis, they may be suicidal, they may be exhibiting symptoms that would cause alarm, only to be told that they were not allowed to stay, be admitted into the hospital because of an insurance company requirement to provide prior authorization, or patients having to deal with an insurance company while they're having an emotional crisis. This bill would ban that. This would give patients at least 72 hours in the hospital to get stabilized before an insurance company would come in and work on concurrent review.
We've got about 30 seconds left. What about junk insurance?
Yes, that was part of the original bill. This bill would ban short-term junk insurance policies, which are actually financial scams. They offer very low premiums but very high deductibles, and often do not cover prior pre-existing conditions. And so the original bill would ban that. That provision has been carved out and is now part of a separate bill, but we hope to also get that passed this year.
Representative Mueller, thank you so much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. We certainly appreciate it.
It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
House Republican Floor Leader Patrick Windhorst of Metropolis is next on Illinois Lawmakers. A former Massac County State's Attorney, Representative Windhorst is the GOP spokesperson on the House Judiciary Criminal and Restorative Justice Committees. Good to have you back on the program.
Great to be on the program. Thank you.
Now, I've watched a lot of House Republican floor leaders over the years, going back to Bill Black's time, Mike Boss' time. You're kind of the chief spokesman on, at the moment, on whatever the legislation is, and sometimes it gets really hot and heavy out there.
Well, it definitely can. My job is to be prepared, whatever bill's called, to make an argument, to ask questions, to make sure everyone, especially on our side of the aisle, is aware of what we're voting on and how they'd like to vote. And part of that is also organizing the debate to make sure our best voices on a particular issue are the ones that are able to speak up and ready to debate a bill. We will, of course, as you said, get really contentious sometimes, and I think that is to be expected.
You've been working on a House Republican working group that's dealing with issues associated with criminal justice, in particular, making some tweaks to the Safety Act that passed earlier, passed last year here. What are some of the things that your working group is how you're approaching this? And there's also a Democratic working group, and you may be meeting in the middle somewhat.
Well, we hope to meet with the Democratic working group to talk about the ideas we have. Our working group was put together by our leader, Tony McCombie. She wanted us to put forward common sense solutions to the issues facing public safety and criminal justice. We have a lot of experienced voices on our side of the aisle. Myself as a former prosecutor, we have 3 current police officers or law enforcement officers in our caucus. We have 2 attorneys who are on our working group that have brought a variety of issues, and we've also reached out to stakeholders and community members to get ideas to improve.
There's kind of a raft of bills that you've got out there. Let's start with House Bill 5120, which widens the possible detention net to all felonies and does some other things. What's the intention there?
Well, with the Safety Act, we've eliminated cash bail. So a judge is making a determination if a person will be held in custody pretrial or released. There's no middle ground anymore. However, the law currently says that there's only certain offenses for which a person can be held. We want to expand that to all felony offenses and give the judge greater discretion on those offenses. We also are changing the burden of proof for detention. The law right now is clear and convincing evidence. That's the next highest legal standard below a felony or below a conviction for a proof beyond a reasonable doubt. We're going to lower that to preponderance of the evidence. We're hearing about cases where people who should be held aren't able to because of that burden.
There's another one, House Bill 5121. It calls for the revocation of pretrial release when the defendant's charged with an offense while they're out on release.
Yes, one of the big concerns we had with the elimination of cash bail was recidivism, that we were going to see people arrested, released, and continue to commit criminal offenses. This bill is designed to address that. So if someone is arrested on an offense and released and they commit another offense, then they're held pending trial.
There's another one that restores the process for courts to issue warrants for failure to appear in court.
That's correct. Another concern we had with the Safety Act was the fact that people would not report to court or appear in court when they're supposed to. The Safety Act put in a system where a summons is preferred over a warrant for a failure to appear. This restores the prior law that says, no, a judge can issue a warrant and have the person come to court when they miss a court appearance.
House Bill 5131 establishes a timeline with the Department of Human Services to remove someone from a county jail. This has to do with mental health aspects. How does this work? How would it work?
If a person is found unfit for trial because of a mental illness, they're supposed to be placed in the custody of DHS to be made fit for trial, to get mental health treatment and then returned to court for trial. The problem is these individuals aren't being taken to DHS in a timely manner. They're supposed to be taken within 20 days under the prior law. That's been moved to 60 days under the current law, and it isn't even being met, that 60-day provision. What we would like to do is return it to 20 and say to the state, if you don't place these individuals within the 20 days, then you will have to pay the costs of incarceration and mental health treatment to the sheriff.
Representative Windhorst, thanks very much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. We'll be looking forward to seeing how you and the Democrats maybe find some middle ground on this in weeks and months to come.
We hope so. Thank you.
Wrapping up this edition of Illinois Lawmakers with Jerry Nowicki, Editor-in-Chief of Capital News Illinois. Jerry, this session has been a bit different from other years that we've had here at the Capitol. They've moved a lot of bills here in the last few weeks, waiting for the budget to drop. So I think that's really the main thing that we're looking at this point. And we really don't have a whole lot of insight into what's going to happen in the next couple of days.
No, we don't. As I told you a couple weeks ago, the whole end of May said budget hold date, so here we are. Next week is still the budget hold date, and we're going to find out what they're doing when they file it.
At this point, we're so late in the session, what happens to bills that haven't made it on, past second and third reading? They're going to have to be dealt with later on in the veto session or the lame duck session, because the new legislature starts over with a completely new slate.
Right. So you said it. It's the veto session or a lame duck. I think a lot can happen in a lame duck session when you got a lot of outgoing lawmakers. We'll see how that goes. I think one of the most memorable sessions I've covered is the 2021 lame duck session, where we got a new speaker and the Safety Act was passed, and all sorts of other things occurred in that span.
Does anything point to anything like that at this point? Nothing really seems to be holding fire that much.
Well, I'd look for maybe a tier 2 type pension fix. I don't have any inside information, but if you're going to do it, if you're going to change pensions, do it when you got some outgoing lawmakers for it's an easier vote for them.
And there's some financial incentives to doing that, because if tier 2 people have to go back on pay into Social Security, it'll be a completely different financial situation. Jerry Nowicki, thanks so much for your time on Illinois Lawmakers. We certainly appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week's Illinois Lawmakers. We'll be back next week here from the Illinois State Capitol.